Supreme Court said, nope, John Boehner, you cannot pass that law. Of course, John Boehner wasn't in there yet. That law is unconstitutional. We're throwing it out. All right. Dred Scott, they said he couldn't be a citizen of the United States. Terrible, horrendous decision. There's books on it. There's a book by Dred Scott, too. Gibbon versus Ogden, we've already talked about that on here, on that first sheet that I showed you guys, where Gibbon versus Ogden said you have to enforce federal laws. You have to. It's a requirement. It's your obligation. It's your duty. Let's see. Extradition. What's extradition? It's on the bottom of your sheet here. Extradition means if you've committed a crime, let's say in Connecticut, and then you've committed a crime here in Texas, that if Connecticut asks us to, the governor of Connecticut asks us to, we send the person that we have that's committed a crime in our state back to Connecticut, where they originally did the first crime, so they can get tried there. After they get tried and sentenced and all that there, they can still be sent to us to be tried, and then we can have our crack at them. But usually you extradite to the place where they first committed the crime. Now that happens too. We also have treaties and things with other countries, and if somebody commits a crime in the United States, and let's say they flee somewhere like France, which doesn't believe in the death penalty, I think France will not extradite them to us if we say we're going to go for the death penalty. There's certain countries that say, I'm sorry, that's part of our treaty. If you're going to go for the death penalty, we're not sending them home. Well, then we'll have to guarantee we're not going for the death penalty. So treaties also supersede state laws. So we've got that going too, okay? Extradition means, of course, sending somebody to where they need to go, where they committed the original crime. Judicial review is the ability of the courts, the power of the judiciary. I'm going to read you the definition, which is confusing, and then tell you what to think, okay? The power of the judiciary, Supreme Court, to judge the constitutionality of legislative and executive actions. What that means is the courts can decide if it's constitutional or not. So the legislative, Congress passes a law that's not constitutional, or the president says, I am going to collect all the potatoes in the United States and smash them, and we're not going to eat potatoes anymore. And he passes an executive order, and and it's the law of the land. The judiciary, the Supreme Court, can come in and say, no, that's not going to happen. So judicial reviews, where the courts review decisions that have been made by legislative and executive branch. Let's see what else we have. Article 6 of the Constitution is this. Article 6 says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And boy, do I wish our judges today read that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. They don't go by that. A lot of times we have very activist judges. They rule what they think is best. All right. Original jurisdiction. That means the power of a court to hear the case for the very first time. Let's see what the definition. The right to hear and decide a case when it's first brought to trial. That's called original jurisdiction. A lot of you guys that like law shows and police shows and all that, you'll hear people say, this is my jurisdiction, or maybe it's over the county line, so that's your jurisdiction. And that means that's your right to hear that case. Well, in this case, it means it's your right to hear that case. Appellate jurisdiction means it's already been tried, and we have the right to hear the appeal. So our decision's already been made, but we have the right to hear the appeal. There's also, I'm going back to this again, we have state laws and federal laws. Even in federal courts within Texas, you can be tried for federal things. Like, for instance, if you rob a bank, that's a federal crime. There's certain things. Did you guys know that if you take something out of somebody's mailbox, that is a federal crime? And I remember having a policeman living across the street from us when I was a little kid, and we would stick stuff in people's mailboxes and just kind of messing around. And I remember my dad saying, "Oh no, Dad, that's a federal crime." And a policeman lived there. I mean, his kids did it too, but I didn't touch another mailbox after that. Don't you dare put something in somebody's mailbox. Even like if you're going to put a flyer or something and you put it in somebody's mailbox, I wouldn't. I'm telling you, I just don't mess around with stuff like that because they could say you're messing with their mail or whatever. If you send something through the mail, let's say you send a nasty picture through the mail or whatever, ooh, that's terrible. Or if you send a note blackmailing somebody or anything that's done through the mail, that makes it an even much worse crime than it would normally be because it's through the mail. So anything, that's federal, okay? So talking about, what were we talking about? Let's see. About jurisdiction, extradition. See, I forget just like I do in class. All right, we'll come back to it. Let's see what else. Oh, I know. If you, there's all kinds of things that are decided by federal courts. That's what I was going to talk about. So within this, state of Texas is going to try you, or you're in a federal court. It might be in Texas, but you're still in a federal court. So, but what would happen in Washington, D.C. and in the Supreme Court and stuff like that, anything like with ambassadors or the United States, somebody's bringing a suit against the United States, that's going to be in a federal court. It's something to do with the United States government itself. 2 or more state governments, like if Washington State is suing Ohio, that's going to be in a federal court. Citizens of different states, so somebody in one state suing somebody in another state. Anything to do with a foreign country, consulate, ships out in the ocean, treaties, federal laws, or if we're going to decide the constitutionality of something, it's going to go in federal court, and then it might make its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, okay? So those are going to be federal courts. I should have given you guys a sheet that looks like this talking about that. Cases. I hope I'm not going too fast for y'all. I see the little clock ticking away, and I'm thinking about your time. I put on there maritime jurisdiction and some of the other things we need to look at. All right, John Jay, I want you to know him, so write that on your little sheet of notes. John Jay, first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It's just important to know. John Jay, and I think we have some quotes from him. Roe v. Wade. That is the name of a court case where the Supreme Court decided, Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court decided that abortions were legal, superseded all the state laws, and Roe v. Wade is the thing that really is, even the Borking that you read about in your chapter 10, Robert Bork, and how they said you're Borking if you're going against somebody that's supposed to be nominated for the court. Robert Bork was nominated for the Supreme Court by Ronald Reagan, and he had the qualifications and everything, but it was really the first time that political parties really went against him because they were afraid of how he'd decide on the Supreme Court. And they were afraid that he would overturn, he would be the deciding factor on the court to overturn, because the court was split, Roe v. Wade. So they were afraid he was going to outlaw abortion again, which we're hoping for a justice that will outlaw abortion again. So because they were afraid of that, they just came against him. They would not confirm him. It was totally political. It didn't have anything to do with qualifications or anything. So that's when you read about Borking, which is kind of an odd name, but anyway, Borking, and it's all because of Roe v. Wade. So you'll hear, now that you know that term, you'll hear it a lot because it all has to do with abortion. And the courts, of course, they infringed on state sovereignty, and they really overstepped their bounds. Another important justice is John Marshall, and he was the 4th Chief Justice, and he was in the Mulberry versus Madison decision, so he was involved in that. And I think we know what treason was. You'll hear something, this isn't going to be on a test or a quiz, but if you'll hear something called a litmus test, that means if you want someone to be a judge on the Supreme Court, you cannot give them a litmus test. And that means you can't say, well, how are you going to decide on abortion? Well, how are you going to decide on immigration? So we just have to confirm judges we think decide on constitutionality and hope for the best. And you can't give them a litmus test and ask them how they will decide. It's actually against the law to do that. You can get in big trouble for doing that. So therefore, sometimes we get judges on the Supreme Court and we think, ooh, they're going to be so conservative. Well, they get on that Supreme Court. They're on there for life. because there's separation of powers, and all of a sudden they're way more liberal than we ever thought they would be. They don't have to worry about winning re-elections or whatever, and they start ruling their mind. Or they're way more conservative, which I like, than the left thinks they're going to be. So left means liberal, than the liberals think they'll be. So you'll hear about that litmus test. I wish in some ways we could give them a litmus test, but it is against the Constitution, so I guess I'll go by what they say. All right, we're going to do a few more little review things on Part B, and then we'll be done. I hope you guys, we're going to be talking about laws and the Bill of Rights, Part B. I'm going to try to hold it to 10 minutes if I can. So we'll see you in a minute. Thanks.